Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm privileged to welcome a very, very respected and top television personality from Australia, Mr. Anthony Ackroyd. Anthony, welcome to the show.
Ashutosh, it's wonderful to be here, and greetings from Australia.
Thank you. Anthony is the Chief Enjoyment Officer of the Laughter Advantage. He's an Australian comedian, actor, writer, and motivational speaker known for his impersonations of political figures. Anthony became a household name as a star of ABC TV's legendary comedy series, The Big Gig, and I've seen a few shows of that, and has performed and written for hundreds of Australian and international television shows, radio programs, and feature films. He's also a writer, performer of three of Australia's most successful comedy TV series, Hey Hey, It's Saturday, The Comedy Company, and Good News Week. And for 25 years, Anthony was one of the stars of ABC Radio's top rating comedy show, Thank God It's Friday. My goodness, what an amazing set of achievements on television. Thank you for being on my show.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to talking about laughter, my favorite subject.
Absolutely. So let me start by asking you, how did you first become interested in comedy and impersonations?
The impersonations came later.
Yeah.
I'd been doing comedy for 25 years. I can explain how I got into that, but just going back to the beginning. Yeah, I thought I was going to be a rock star.
Wow.
And that almost happened. That's a different story, but it didn't happen.
I can see the guitar behind you.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, I still play the guitar, and I was able to integrate the music into my comedy. But alas, the rock star thing didn't quite happen in the way I'd planned. And I actually grew up in a tiny little city. It was tiny at the time, called Hobart in Tasmania, which for your international viewers who mightn't be familiar with the geography, Tasmania is a little island off the end of the mainland of Australia. So if you go any further down, you'll arrive at the South Pole.
I've been there. Yes.
So that's where I began. And I moved to Sydney to pursue music or acting. I was also an actor. But basically, I was looking for, fame and fortune. And after 2 or 3 months, I lowered my expectations and I was looking for food and shelter.
Okay.
Like many potential performers.
Correct.
And I'd heard about a place called the Comedy Store. And a lot of people have heard of the LA Comedy Store and the American Comedy Store, and the Sydney Comedy Store had just been opened, only been open about 6 months. And I knew from the plays I'd done that I had a bit of a flair for comedy. I was also desperate. So I went down to the Comedy Store, watched what was called a tryout night. They're now called open mic nights. And I watched the comedy. I saw what happened to some of the performers. It wasn't pretty. Others kind of survived, and others, lived bravely. And I decided to give it a shot. So I got a little bit of an act together, went down to the Comedy Store, and gradually, after a lot of ups and downs, became successful. That was my beginning in comedy.
Wow. What an amazing journey. And I love the way you so quickly defined what you wanted to be and where you finally reached. And I think, as they say, the rest is history, so fantastic. You're also known for your impersonations of political figures.
Yes.
What drew you to impersonate these personalities, and how do you perfect their mannerisms and speech patterns?
Yeah, interesting question. So, as I was alluding to before, I started doing comedy in 1982. So that's 41 years ago. So I did all those TV things that you mentioned, like The Big Gig, which was like a Saturday Night Live TV show comedy, which was very adventurous and risky, and did a lot of radio. Then in 2007, Australia got a new prime minister. His name was Kevin Rudd.
Correct.
And I was doing a radio show, which I done for decades called Thank God It's Friday, which you mentioned or alluded to before. And I did a little impersonation of Kevin Rudd just as part of a skit. And it went so well.
Amazing.
But my comedy colleague said, Anthony, you've got to run with this. And so Kevin has more hair than I do. So I went out and got a little blonde wig. And then we did a live, Thank God It's Friday, and there was about 300 people there. And I was asked a question. The whole show was about current affairs and events and satirical comedy of that nature. So I was asked a question that involved Kevin Rudd, and I said, just a minute, I think he's here. So I ducked my head down and put on this wig and came back up, and there was kind of an audible gasp from the audience. And then I did Kevin's voice, which is very distinctive. And I knew I was onto something. So really, in a way, it was an accident that I got involved in impersonation. I just happened to look and sound like a new prime minister. Of course, then you have to apply the comic tools and techniques to make that work. And that's how the whole thing began.
And after Kevin Rudd, did you do any other impersonations, well-known personalities?
I did. Now, some of your listeners may not be familiar with the history of Australian politics, but Kevin was tossed out by his deputy prime minister, Julia Gillard. So she became the prime minister. And because I'd done Kevin, people said, oh, can you do Julia? So I said, I guess so. So that was, my only attempt at kind of a drag act. But again, you have to apply the comedy tools and techniques, do the writing and make it work. And then I did another prime minister, Tony Abbott, after that. And then I thought that's enough. I want to concentrate on other areas. But it was an amazing journey.
Absolutely.
And really, to answer your question about how do you imitate their mannerisms and their gestures and their vocal intonations, that's really observation, applying, comedy's like any other industry. It has ways of using tools, techniques, strategies, approaches that make comedy work. So it is an art and it is a science. And that's what I had to apply in terms of impersonating these people.
Fascinating. And what would you say, Anthony, is your own unique style that you have been able to connect so easily with audiences?
I think it was right at the beginning of going right back to the 80s. It was relatability. Like I think the comic's job, of at least for some comics, it was for me, is to get inside the audience's head and to actually say what they're thinking, but in a surprising way. So you get that reaction of, oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah, oh, yeah. So people identify with what you're talking about, everyday situations, that they can put themselves into your shoes as you're talking about these situations, putting yourself into their shoes. And I think that's one of the powers of comedy, actually, is that's incredible rapport and being able to read an audience and deliver the material that they relate to. So I think it was that relatability. And also, I think a certain bravery. I'm much more introverted off stage, but on stage, it's quite outrageous and quite, you have to take those risks. And sometimes you fail miserably, but if you succeed, it's unlike any other feeling I've ever had in my life, really. It's just an amazing, ecstatic feeling. So that's comedy. It's highs, lows. Gradually, you get on a trajectory where the highs keep increasing. But it's a birth by fire for sure.
Amazing. But I'm fascinated by what you just said. I watch a lot of interesting comedy from around the world, but you said that you were introverted. I can't ever imagine a person who does such powerful comedy being introverted.
I know, it's amazing. And not all comics are introverts, but I would say probably 80% tend to be. And someone actually did an interview with me for a magazine, introverts versus extroverts, and they had a psychologist who gave me a big quiz and a big, kind of survey to fill in, and they concluded that I'm actually an ambivert.
Wow.
So on stage, big, loud, confident. Off stage, quieter. I certainly, have my moments and enjoy, hanging out with friends and laughing. But sometimes people are surprised by the contrast between the on-stage Anthony and the one that's off stage.
Wow. So tell me, you do so many different things, and I've often asked this to people who do so many different areas. I mean, you work as a comedian, an actor, a writer, and a motivational speaker. How do you balance different roles, and how do these complement one another?
Yeah, well, that's a really good question. It is a balancing act, and sometimes one area can become the main focus, and at another time, another opportunity will present itself. And Ash, I have tried to sometimes, think I've got to focus. I've got to narrow my focus. But when I do that, I become unhappy. And if I'm not playing all these different roles, then I lose energy. So they all do complement each other. And I've come to accept now that I do have to do them all just to stay, for my own well-being and for my own happiness as a performer. So yeah, again, it's a balancing act, but when it's a nice balance, it's a really happy way of being.
Interesting. One more question relating to political satire that you do so much work on. How do politicians and political parties react to political satire? Because I know in many countries it is frowned upon. Australia, of course, is much more liberal. I'd love to get your perspective.
Yeah, again, a great question. And I've actually you've written articles about this for the Sydney Morning Herald, a paper I used to write for, about the differences in exactly what you're saying. In some countries, I could be in prison for what I've done in terms of mocking and ridiculing, our leaders. But I think it's a very healthy thing to do. It's very egalitarian and kind of puts us all onto the same level. It makes people accountable in a way. So in terms of my reaction here in Australia, I get a better ride than other satirists, perhaps in other countries have had. In Western countries, we're pretty much okay. As I mentioned, the person I started this whole impersonation journey with was Prime Minister Kevin Rudd. There were opportunities for us to work together, but he wouldn't do that. So I think he was a bit protective of his image. But through that, I got to know, through impersonating Kevin, got to know a wonderful guy who was Australia's most popular ever Prime Minister, Bob Hawke. And I got to know him very, very well. And he loved comedy. He loved satire. He loved this whole idea of bringing comedy and directing it at leaders. So I think it's a case-by-case basis. And some leaders are more receptive than others. But I think it's a very healthy thing when leaders can incorporate laughter in terms of, laughing at themselves in an appropriate way. Yeah.
Well said. So let me now move to your other avatar as a motivational speaker.
Yes.
How do you integrate humor into motivational speaking?
Well, I guess what I talk about is all based around humor. So my main keynote speech and workshop is called Stress Less, Laugh More. So it's not stand-up comedy, but I incorporate a lot of humor into that keynote speech. So having a keynote called Stress Less, Laugh More gives me the opportunity. But I teach other people, on all different subjects, how to integrate humor into their keynote speeches or their presentations or even their business communication, because humor is just so powerful in terms of engaging parts of the brain that bring us into rapport, bring us into connection with other people. So I really encourage people. I run a course myself called Humour Skills, and I've had people from all different industries, but you wouldn't associate some of them with humor and laughter. But if we can kind of sweeten our communication with humor and laughter, people become more open to your message, they trust you, they connect with you. So I think it is a very powerful tool for any sort of speaker.
Well said. Another question I wanted to ask you was, you've been performing for over 4 decades, as you mentioned.
Yes.
But over the last 4 decades, technology has made a big entry into our lives. How are you using technology and the fact that most young people are probably now watching comedy on their little handheld devices?
I know. So, having done it, as you quite rightly mentioned, for 4 decades, I've seen so many changes. Like when I began, TV was king, and to get on TV gave you a massive audience. Now it's so diverse. And I know myself now, I watch very little TV, so I get to, when I'm watching comedy, it's usually on YouTube. People love TikTok. People love small doses of humor sometimes, as compared to watching an hour and a half.
Correct.
So things have changed a lot. And in terms of technology, I did some experiments on the new AI tools, ChatGPT, and I thought that's man versus machine. And at the moment, human beings are winning. I think it's going to take a long time before the algorithms actually produce really good comedy, because at the moment it's not happening. But I guess every comic's got to adapt, and when new technologies come in like YouTube, comedians have to adapt to that, because people are seeing their act, and then sometimes they'll go to a comedy room and they've already seen part of your act. So it's a double-edged sword. It can publicize what you do, but it can also kind of cruel your act, because people have already seen some of it on YouTube. So like all of us, comedians are adapting to new technologies all the time.
Correct. And a related question, how have you seen audience tastes change? Now with the millennials and the Gen Zs, and of course now the Gen Alphas coming in, have you seen audience taste for comedy and satire change and evolve?
I have seen that. And we live in an age where, offense is easily taken. So I think it's a bit of a minefield now. I'm actually, I think it'd be very different if I was beginning in stand-up comedy right now. Because in the 80s, I think people had a much better understanding of irony, that what you were saying was ironic in terms of something that's not to be taken literal.
Correct.
But now people can react and just take the literal meaning and not seeing the irony behind it. So I think that must be a worry for young comedians working at the moment. So it has changed over the years. Sensitivities have changed. Swearing now is commonplace.
Correct.
When we began, we being the comedians I began with, and we were called new wave comedians.
Okay.
Like the bands.
Absolutely.
So, and we were considered quite outrageous, because we swore in our acts, and people were kind of, excited by it. It confronted some people, but now it's so commonplace. I think it has very little effect, using language. We used it to affect, to kind of, startle an audience or get a reaction from them. So it's an ever-evolving art form. comedy. So I'm, I don't know what's going to come next, but there'll be more adaptations.
I agree. When I speak to a lot of my both my sons and my nephews and nieces who are all millennials and Gen Z, I often tell them, I said, you guys don't accept or understand what is a tongue-in-cheek comment,
Yes.
Someone
yes, this
take it literally.
This literalism, yeah. That they just take the one meaning. So I mean, it's great that we are now all more, all of us are now more sensitive and aware of, gender issues and people's sensitivities. I think eventually we'll find another sweet spot where comedy can thrive and people understand the intention behind the comedy.
I'm sure. So my next question is, again, related to audience, but I also find that a lot of sensitive topics are now getting discussed on by comedians on stage, which include religion. I'd love to get your perspective on that. And we've had some challenges in my country.
Yeah, indeed. So I think we're going back to potential minefield, but also something that does need to be talked about. And a comedian does have an enormous license, again, in Western countries, particularly, to say the things that other people can't say in other platforms and formats of debate. So we do have that license. So with religion, yeah, you do have to be a little bit careful, but but my philosophy is nothing should be outside the bounds of discussion.
Absolutely.
And it comes back to the way in which the comic presents that. And some of them over the decades have done that absolutely brilliantly, and I'm sure that will continue.
Well said. So time for two more questions for you.
Sure.
My next question is that, can humor skills be learned, or do you have to be born with the specific timing that you need to have comedy?
Yeah, well, I've taught humor skills and I've taught comedy now for almost 30 years. So my answer is yes. Humor skills can definitely be taught. People can learn how to use, again, tools and techniques, use them skillfully. And I guess it's like any field of endeavor. Not everyone's going to be the Olympic athlete.
Correct.
But everyone can get better at, jogging around the block.
Yeah.
So the idea that, there's a base level of, comedy skill and you can never get above that, that's just not true. And everyone gets better in every class I've ever taught. And these are people from every imaginable work of life. Everyone improves, and it's fun. It's fun to create a funny line or learn how timing works or rhythm. Things like transitions and all these kind of technical terms can be learned like any other skill. So yes, humor skills can be learned, and it's a lot of fun learning them.
Fabulous. And my last question to you, Anthony, and this is for the thousands of people who will listen to our conversation. Based on your own amazing journey as a comedian, as a political satirist, what would you say are 3 lessons you would want our viewers and listeners to take away, especially viewers and listeners who are aspiring to be able to not become comedians professionally, but to be able to draw a laugh from the audience or the group that they're sitting with?
Yeah, great. Well, I would say number one is to remember that laughter changes energy.
Yeah.
And this is something, going back to the days when I was just doing tryout nights as a complete newbie. And, you're not very good when you begin. You may be the 20th act on. And so I would look out in the audience, I'd see people tired. I'd see people, bored, distracted, talking to the person next to them. Some people hostile, they're just waiting to heckle you. And as I got better and as I got those laughs happening, I would see the energy change. So the bored people would get interested, distracted people would get focused, the hostile people would become friendly. So remember that laughter changes energy, and that everyone wants their energy changed.
Yeah.
Number two is to see laughter as a form of communication.
Yeah.
Because we think of laughter as a reaction,
Yeah.
but we're really communicating that this universal sound that we all make, which is
Correct.
We are communicating to other people. We're saying,
Yeah.
I like you, we're in this together, everything will be all right. And my third tip, and this is probably the biggest one that I communicate in my workshop, is to see laughter as a gift. Because everyone wants to feel a little bit better. Everyone wants to get those wonderful chemicals circulating through their body and to have their mood elevated. And when you're the source of that, it's just an amazing feeling. And it also gives you a lot of influence, a lot of connection, and, you know, a connection too to our basic humanity. You know, we are, or you're in India, I'm in Australia, we're all in this together, everyone who's listening to this right now. So enjoy using that universal language of laughter, and you'll start to get the results coming back to you.
Amazing. And on that note, Anthony, and your three amazing lessons, laughter changes energy. Everyone wants energy. Second, you said is laughter is a form of communication. And third, you said, which is so powerful, laughter is a gift.
Yes.
And also, laughter is a universal language. Thank you so much for speaking to me about your amazing journey. Thank you for talking to me about so many different aspects of comedy, impersonation. Thank you for speaking to me about motivational speeches. And thank you also for talking to me about so many different forms of laughter and so many different things that we can do as human beings to make everyone else more comfortable with this universal language of laughter. Thank you for speaking to me, and good luck.
Thank you, Ash, and keep up your wonderful work and giving your gift through the brand called You. You're doing wonderful work, my friend. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the brand called You.